Hello and welcome to Dialogue. U.S. President Donald Trump recently said the U.S. is close to reaching a trade deal with China. What are the prospects for a lasting breakthrough in China-U.S. trade relations? How does this potential deal fit into the broader context of China-U.S. ties? And as the U.S. tariffs rip across the global economy, how might global trade patterns shift in response? To explore these questions and more, I'm pleased to be joined in the first half of the show by Fred Teng, President of the America-China Public Affairs Institute. In the second half, I'll also be joined by other guests to continue our talk. That's our topic. I'm Xu Qinduo. Welcome to Dialogue, Fred. So I wonder, what's your take on Trump's recent remark on, relationship with China and also the deal, a possible trade deal between the two countries? He also talked about a possible summit between him and President Xi Jinping. So first of all, so are we going to have a trade deal between the two countries, or at least the extension of the tariff suspension?
Well, I think after 8 years of negotiation cycles, this really goes back to Trump's first term. I think both sides have learned that lasting progress comes from gradually working with each other, building trust, and it's more from a consistent, quiet compromise. I think China focuses on results and United States often on headlines. But this time, I think the United States understand that you need to work with each other. So the balance is really lies in the United States showmanship. And I think that, so far, so good. Every step of the way, they have made incrementally progress. And as long as the meetings will continue, I think the trade deal will be reached. This is a long-standing issue between the United States and China, and it's the most consequential bilateral trade relationship. So the whole world is watching, and I think it will come to a conclusion that both sides is satisfied.
So, Fred, well, the trade deal is important. What about the summit meeting? Obviously, that's important, or even more important. But what does it mean, if there is one, to this arguably most important relationship in the world, and also the rest of the world?
Yes. Well, I think the summit between the two leaders, it's symbolic. It's symbolic of that both sides are reaching some compromise with each other. So that means the trade situation is some of it or all of it is being resolved. I think it's also symbolic to the people of both countries that the leaders are talking to each other. So that means United States and China are getting closer and not falling far apart. And I think the rest of the world is watching because the U.S. China trade is the most consequential trade in the world, and because of size and volume. So I think that everybody is hoping to see such a summit, but a lot of details need to be worked out by both sides.
Mm-hmm. Well, President Trump is unique in a sense. He's very different from traditional politicians, those from the Democratic Party or so-called newcons, hardline, political, mindset there. But help us understand what's his vision in terms of, this relationship with China. How is it similar or different from, say, that of the Biden administration?
I think President Trump, like you said, he's a unique individual. He certainly is a unique political leader, someone I don't think we have seen of. He has his own way of communicating to the people, and he's winning a lot of the Americans' support. So in terms of his end game, I think basically he is a short game player. He likes to having wins all the time, and certainly face is very important to him. And so you can see sometimes he gets angry even at his staff if something is not going his way. I think President Biden, unfortunately, he gets very old, and as we can see, during his term, he was not really being very aware of what's going on. And his staff didn't really adopt a policy that makes sense. Basically, they're just following Trump's first-term policy. So that's why President Biden didn't do anything contributing to in terms of both countries, in terms of the relationship.
President Trump prefers to be recognized as a president of peace. Do you think he will do something, special to basically help stabilize or creating more peace for Asia-Pacific region in terms of the South China Sea issue, or in particular the Taiwan question? For example, will he support a peaceful reunification between the mainland and Taiwan?
Well, I think, first of all, if President Trump wants peace, the best thing for him to do is stay out of the situation. For the South China Sea, China has settled with 12 of its neighboring country of land borders. And they give, they take, and they work out a very, very good conclusion. Certainly, South China Sea can be resolved in that way too. But that has to be between China and those countries bilaterally. And so I think that if the United States stay out of the situation, it's probably we'll see much more long-term peace. As far as Taiwan goes, Taiwan is really an internal affair between the people of mainland China and the people of Taiwan. And that situation, in terms of the reunification, will be advocated by the people of both sides and not have to do the United States. Whether the United States support it or not, well, it's good if they support it. But if they don't, still, they cannot stop the will of the people on both sides wanting to reunify. I think that the voices are much, much stronger on the Taiwan side for the people, willingness, because they can see the benefit of the reunification that they'll bring to themselves and to their future generations.
Back to this relationship between China and the U.S. Recently, there's an opinion poll done by the U.S. think tank Third Way. Interesting discussion. A finding, rather. There are some, for revolutions. Americans are starting to think more positively about China. For example, since 2023, the share of Americans who view China, negatively has dropped by 7%. Percentage points, and those who see China as an ally or trade partner has increased by 8 percentage points. Are you surprised by the results, and why?
Well, I think the results were negative because our political leader make it so. If they talk about every day, they talk about negatively about China, and the U.S. media support that rhetoric, then the people have that feeling. But these days, I think that people can see China is not the enemy. They can see the trade with China. Right now, people are still enjoying goods. That's good product, relatively low price, and the only problem is the U.S. tariff that's costing them their cost of their living. I think that people also can see that the people to people, even though on the government side, a lot of things have been stopped and so forth, but the people to people attending, visiting each other has not stopped. I have personally received delegations from universities from China, many of them, 4 or 5 of them last year alone, and this year also. And also U.S. delegation visiting China. The descendants of Flying Tiger just was in China recently. And there are people who go to Guilin and have reunifications, and people have really warm feelings. What we see sometimes is just the reporting in the media that all of this negative feeling. So as people can see them for themselves and travel to China, I think that they will see that China is not the enemy. It's a very friendly country. All the people in China very open and very friendly, and China is just a great place to visit.
You recently wrote that China and the U.S. should enhance cooperation in the manufacturing sector. which would enable them to jointly lead the global industrial development process, thus benefiting the entire world. Tell us more on that.
Well, that's really, it's like it's a warm-up for the 15-5 program planning coming up. What I'm saying is, I might be idealistic, but I think that it would be great for the United States and China to work with each other. Not working with each other, it's not thinkable because both sides, if they decouple, if they become two different systems, I think for me as an American, I think the United States will get hurt more than China. Both sides will get hurt. So I would like to see manufacturing cooperation because these days, it's no longer a one factory can make a single product. Everything has to be made globalized from supply chain. And, when we talk about iPhone built in China, it doesn't mean all of the parts are from China. When we talk about a Tesla made in Shanghai, it's not all of the parts are made in their factory. They need cooperations and the supply chain. President Trump talked about using his tariff, he can bring back a lot of factories. I said to him that, I didn't say him to personally, but I said to is that right now, if the United States does not have the global supply chain, they cannot afford to build a factory in the United States. Every screw, every wire, every light bulb, every paint, all of these things have to come from a global supplier, not necessarily China, but have to come from. Otherwise, it will cost 5 to 10 times more in terms of building a factory in the United States.
Recently there's a report saying that in the first half of this year, 36 Chinese companies went public in the U.S. and still 40 more Chinese companies are in the waiting line. Last year, 2024 witnessed a record-breaking number of 64 such companies. This year, the tally could be 76, let's say. So a new record could be set in terms of the Chinese companies going public in the U.S. Can we say the business ties between the two sides remain strong?
Well, I think the Chinese business always want to work with the United States. In terms of listing on the stock market, I think what they need is a long-term stability in the United States. So their listing is protected. We also seen a number of Chinese companies withdraw from listing on the U.S. market just because they feel the United States government can do things to them so that it will stop their equity in terms of tradings and so forth. So I think it's a very good sign that the Chinese company want to be listed in the United States. And it's also a good sign that there are a lot of U.S. investors want to invest in Chinese companies. It is still a very early game why Chinese companies are not really big in terms of the global capitalization. I think those who are investing early with good companies will see their long-term growth and they will see their profit in the long run.
Well, there's also a case in point of win-win a cooperation there. Earlier you mentioned about this, working together in manufacturing, but of course certainly in trade, there's a strong trade ties between the two sides, but also it's where we see tensions between the two sides. U.S. side complained about this trade deficit with China. The latest numbers show that the trade deficit from the U.S. side is reducing rapidly, probably the lowest point in more than 21 years. And also U.S. is also reducing trade deficit with its other major trading partners like Canada, like Germany. But at the same time, the U.S. imports and exports are also down. So is trade deficit, or narrowing trade deficit necessarily a good thing now?
Well, personally, on trade deficit, I really think it's a misnomer by economists. What happened is that when we have a trade, that means I have something, a cup, a phone, I want to sell it to you, you pay me the money, we agree on the price. That is a perfect trade. No trade has been done, concluded if either side do not agree to it. So what is trade deficit? So these economists take something called import, something called export, and find the differences. So the differences, the trade, so-called trade deficit, is that all it means is that United States pay more cash to buy goods from China than China pay more cash to buy goods from United States. I think it's a good thing. If the trade deficit is reducing, that means we are making more goods for China rather than the other way around. I always ask my American friends, what do we want to do? Do we want to use a piece of paper we call money, that the value is yet to be determined, in exchange for goods produced by somebody else? Or do we want to produce the goods, become the laborer, and other people can pay us the money? So I think that overall, this whole trade deficit idea, it's been going on. They think that because export produce jobs, import doesn't. That's not true. The Heritage Foundation did a whole report on that imports creates a lot of jobs as well, not just exports. So I think that, first we have to put this aside. The trade deficit, there are some of the regions like Hong Kong has trade surplus, meaning they buy more from the United States than the United States buy from Hong Kong, but they still raise the tariff on Hong Kong.
Thank you, Fred. Thank you for speaking to us.
Thank you very much.
Welcome back. To continue our discussion on China-U.S. ties, in this part, I'm glad to be joined by Zhao Hai, Director of International Political Studies at the National Institute for Global Strategy, and Anthony Moretti, Associate Professor at Robert Morris University. Welcome to Dialogue. So, Anthony, I will start with you. President Trump, in a interview, said about a very possible deal with China and also a possible summit with President Xi Jinping later this year. So, what's your take on his remarks?
I think there's on one level it's substantive and on one level it's style. And what I mean by that is, let's start with the style first of all. You know that Trump always has to have the big headline, the massive deal, the most important meeting, some sort of superlative that he tries to throw in. So I think he's going to naturally try to elevate the headline capabilities out of any conversation with the Chinese president. But more importantly is the substance behind it. And the reality is that even though there are ongoing talks about tariffs and trade and all of that, there is a need for the two men to sit across the table from each other and sincerely and deeply discuss where they see the problems that exist, just simply related to the economic relationship between the two countries. And so I think it's important that they do meet. Again, there'll be some symbolism associated with it. Let's not forget that. But the reality is that if the two of them are sitting across the table or having a video conversation, if that's what it takes, if they can hash out some of the differences, cut through some of the challenges, there is an opportunity for a better, more substantive and longer lasting trade deal. Although everything like that with Trump has to be tempered by the reality that at times he wakes up and has these zany ideas about, putting tariffs on islands where only penguins live. So everything has to be taken with that caveat in mind.
Well, Zhao Hai, the trade deal obviously is critically important for stabilizing the bilateral ties or trade ties in particular. It's important for the U.S., it's important for China, and for the world. Of course, a summit between the two leaders is even more important. It could be more comprehensive in terms of the overall relationship between the two sides.
Well, absolutely. The China-U.S. Trade relationship is a win-win situation for both countries. And from China's perspective, we've talked about this for a long time, that if we go to a trade war, it's going to be a lose-lose. This has been vividly displayed in May, and before China and the U.S. reached the agreement in Geneva first, and then London and Stockholm. So the world is watching where this is going, and it's very dangerous that the U.S. continue to play this game while not recognizing the agreement that's been reached in Stockholm. And I think at this point, Trump just wanted to show to the world that he is the final decision maker. Either he's not authorizing enough, giving enough power to the Treasury Secretary Bensent and also Jamison Greer, or the agreement has some missing parts that he continued trying to push China and trying to negotiate with China to get more. Also, now there's an additional factor that before Trump probably wanted to, sign off this trade deal, is that Russia factor, because he also wanted to push China and India to agree on cutting Russian oil. So at this point, I think there are many complicating factors in his calculation. So that's why he's delaying his final decision on whether or not to recognize the trade deal that's been reached in, first in Geneva and then in finally in Stockholm. However, I think even if China and the U.S. Sort of reach a temporary deal, there's still a long way to go, because even if that's true, the fentanyl tariff is still there, and also Trump could very much change his mind from time to time. Even if we reach a deal, he could come up or conjure up another reason to raise another secondary tariff. He has threatened China and other countries on, secondary tariff on the issue of Venezuela, on Iran, and now on Russia. And also, even if you reach a deal with Trump on the general tariff, now he wants to impose tariff on other sectoral tariff on pharmaceuticals, chips, and electronics. Mm-hmm. So there are so many variables in our negotiations and in Trump's calculation of when and where to impose tariff. It's very hard to predict.
Speaking of unpredictability, Zhao Hai, you mentioned about the Russian oil factor there. Yes, there's a threat of 100% tariff from China, India, and other countries purchasing oil from Russia. Is there any way China or India will reduce their purchase of oil from Russia?
Well, that depends. Who can provide the alternative? China and Russia has made it very clear that Russia is an essential energy supplier to the world. If the United States wants to cut off Russian oil, then the U.S. must substitute and supply those reduced amounts of oil and gas to the world. And for big countries, 2.8 billion people in the world with two countries combined, who can supply those oil? I think it's impossible. And every time you hear Trump talking about raising secondary tariff to 100%, it's just bluffing. Because everybody knows when you raise tariff that high, it's basically a trade embargo. No country can trade under those circumstances. So at this point, I think Trump is trying to, again, using his tariff weapon to try to get some desirable political outcome out of this.
Zhao Hai, in the first half of 2025, we have seen 36 Chinese companies went public in the U.S. Right now, 40 more Chinese companies are waiting in line to go public in the U.S. And the last year, there are 64 such companies. That's a record. It seems likely we are going to see a new record in terms of the number of the Chinese companies, being listed in the U.S. If that's true, if that becomes true, so can we say that the ties, business ties at least, between the two sides remains strong there?
Yeah, I think on the one hand, you have geopolitical risks. You have a deterioration of bilateral relationship and political intervention. However, on the other hand, that's economic law. which means that Chinese firms are really producing profits and good quality companies that the U.S. capital market really needs, and that's why there are so many companies still waiting to get to the United States. I mean, there are U.S. companies willing to accept Chinese companies to be publicly listed. On the other hand, of course, is that comparatively, Chinese capital market is not developed in a way that is welcoming some of the small and medium companies, and there are still a long way to go for Chinese capital market to mature and be more efficient. And also, from a regulatory point of view, there are certain types of companies that are more fitting to go to the U.S. and be listed on in the market that welcome new technology and new ideas. So there's a really mutually benefiting mechanism that at work, helping the business overcoming the current fear of the political factors.
Well, Anthony, if you look at the latest numbers coming out, the U.S. trade deficit with China dropped to 9.5 billion, the lowest in 21 years since 2004. Okay, now we have a very small a gap between the two sides in terms of trade. Will that somehow reduce or alleviate the concern in terms of trade deficit? That will probably make it easier for the two sides to reach a deal on trade?
My concern is Trump is going to look at any negative number and say China is taking advantage of us. Previous presidents were a bunch of fools. They should have held China to account, etc. So I don't think the number necessarily matters. And what I mean by that is Trump has in his head that China, by and large, tries to take advantage of the U.S. And furthermore, in his head, is convinced that he is the only president who has the guts to stand up to China. And the problem with that is there's such a recklessness associated with it. And that goes back to one of the comments that was made earlier, this idea of sit down across the table, make a commitment, put some ironclad agreements into or stipulations into an agreement. But for Trump, again, so much of this is, I got the deal done. I got the deal done. But absent reality, which again appears to be something he doesn't often take into account, any trade deficit in his mind is going to be a problem.
On that note, we come to the end of today's discussion. Many thanks to our guests. You can also watch us on the CGTN app or on YouTube. I'm Xu Qinduo. Thanks for being with us. See you next time.